MMA is a grueling sport, with athletes testing themselves in several disciplines to become the best fighters in the world. But it hasn't stopped some keyboard warriors suggesting anyone could be successful with the right training. In 2014, the UFC attempted to make a point by signing a pro wrestling legend, and turning him into one of the sport's biggest punchlines along the way. Welcome to the INC, and this is the MMA career of CM Punk. Philip Jack Brooks is regarded as one of the greatest pro wrestlers of the modern era. Brooks' first venture into pro wrestling came in 1999 as a part of the Lunatic Wrestling Federation. Originally as a singles competitor, Punk was repackaged along with another rookie wrestler as a part of the tag team called the Chick Magnets. Originally dubbed Chick Magnet Punk, the name was later shortened to CM Punk, a moniker he'd use for the rest of his career. After successful spells with the IWA and Ring of Honor, Punk was signed by the WWE in 2005. Over the next 9 years, the straight-edge superstar became one of the company's biggest stars, a multi-time world champion who earned a cult following with his in-ring promos and storytelling abilities, and was seen as one of the few performers to bring indie credibility to an increasingly homogenized product. By 2014, Punk had grown disillusioned with the WWE's direction and announced his retirement from pro wrestling. At 35 and financially set for life, fans were curious to see the next step of Punk's career. His decision took many in the business by surprise. At UFC 181, Punk announced he had signed a multi-fight contract to compete in the UFC. Punk had been a longtime follower of MMA dating back to his childhood, and would become the first fighter to make his pro debut for the promotion since James Toney's infamous match with Randy Couture in 2010. Pro wrestlers competing in MMA was nothing new. Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn were veterans of the business before becoming UFC legends, while Brock Lesnar and Bobby Lashley had both transitioned with varying levels of success. But while Lesnar and Lashley could fall back on their amateur wrestling, Punk entered the sport with no combat experience, and misgivings were raised over whether he could raise his skill set to even a passable level. Modern-day Demosthenes, Nate Diaz, was the first of many fighters to question the UFC's decision-making.
It's like, if I want to, I can't go. If I want to, I can't go play in the NBA. And even Stephen Struth's begging, he can't go play in the NBA if he wants to, because he feels like making a change. For a publicity thing, they wouldn't pay him no money and they wouldn't even let him play. It's ridiculous.
If Punk was to make his UFC run a success, he had the perfect man to guide it. Duke Rufus was a former champion kickboxer before transitioning to coaching in 2008, where he helped father the careers of MMA champions Anthony Pettis and Ben Askren. Punk too showed his dedication to the cause, with him and his wife moving from Chicago to Milwaukee to be closer to the Rufus camp. Punk officially began his MMA training in January of 2015. Although Punk incorporated Kempo and Jiu-Jitsu into his training back in the WWE, it was soon clear his level was well below that of an elite martial artist. Punk was even further hampered when he suffered a shoulder injury, delaying his debut until the next calendar year. The constant pushbacks and rumors of his poor performance made Punk a maligned figure before even setting foot in the octagon, although the former wrestler was capable of holding his own when it came to verbal sparring.
You might remember me from Twitter blowing you up all the time, asking you for a fight. No. My question to you is...
You might remember me from Twitter is the greatest Troy McClure that The Simpsons never ever used.
In 2016, the UFC began turning the wheels for Punk's debut, when 1-0 Mickey Gall took on Mike Jackson on the prelims of Fight Night Vegas. Gall would make easy work of Jackson, finishing the photojournalist in 45 seconds, and was quickly announced as Punk's opponent for his MMA debut. Initial plans were for Punk vs. Gall to take place at UFC 200, only for the fight to be pushed back after Punk underwent surgery for a herniated disc. Instead, Punk would make his bow for UFC 203 at the Quicken Loans Arena, the same venue where Punk made his last WWE appearance 2.5 years earlier. After 19 months of hype and speculation, Punk finally set foot in a UFC octagon. The most eagerly anticipated MMA debut of all time was finally upon us.
Here we go! Mickey Gall shoots a double immediately and has CM Punk on his back.
Punk was taken down almost immediately and offered little defense before Gall submitted him with a rear naked choke. While Punk was able to win fans back in his post-fight interview, the consensus of the match was that of a failed experiment not worthy of repeating. And even Dana White, the man who signed Punk in the first place, questioned whether the pro wrestler should even return to the octagon.
He probably shouldn't have his next fight in the UFC, you know? Just like I said with Brock, having your first fight in the UFC is tough. And you see tonight, even if it's against the guy who's 2-0, you know, this is it's a tough place to learn.
Punk largely stayed out of the spotlight in the months after the Gall fight, reportedly turning down a $1 million offer from an upstart British wrestling promotion to focus on his MMA career. After spending the following year on the sidelines, rumors of a second Punk match began circulating in 2018, with Dana White revealing the company would offer the beleaguered fighter another chance at UFC 225, taking place in Punk's hometown of Chicago. Ironically, Punk's opponent that night would be Mike Jackson, the man Gall had beaten to earn his match with Punk, and the only fighter on the roster Punk had a credible chance of beating. Punk looked much improved against Jackson, holding his own, albeit with admittedly sloppy stand-up. The chick magnet was actively searching for a takedown, and at 4 minutes and 15 seconds of the first round, it finally happened.
Oh, look at this, look at this! There's the takedown for CM Punk.
Still over. CM Punk might have just won his first round in the UFC.
By the second round, however, Jackson's striking started taking a toll on Punk's conditioning, the former wrestler continuing to eat heavy shots as his attempts to get the fight to the ground grew increasingly desperate. Jackson would dominate Punk in a one-sided final round, but rather than finish the fight, he chose to extend Punk's embarrassment. The MMA photographer settled for a unanimous decision and handed Punk his second pro loss. UFC President Dana White didn't hold back in his assessment of Punk. Despite praising the spirit shown in the fight, White suggested the former pro wrestler give up his MMA venture, highlighting Punk's age and lack of improvement despite 3 years of training. Most of White's venom, however, was directed to Jackson, with the UFC president criticizing the fighter for his decision to prolong the bout rather than chase the finish, one that led Jackson to be questioned over accusations of fight fixing. Punk vs. Jackson would have its final twist 3 years later, when it was found Jackson had tested positive for marijuana the day of the fight, overturning the result to a no contest and improving Punk's record to 0-1. Despite his UFC dream being crushed, Punk continued to be associated with MMA, working as a commentator for Cagefighting Championships, and in 2019 finished third in a small jiu-jitsu tournament in his native Chicago. There were only 3 entrants, however, but we'll take a win where it comes. Punk's MMA career finally ended in 2021, when the pro wrestling icon returned to his roots and signed a high-profile deal with AEW, formally announcing his retirement in August that year. While the CM Punk experiment is seen these days as a quirky footnote, it's easy to forget the damage it did short-term, with the UFC accused of sacrificing its legitimacy for a quick publicity stunt. Punk deserves credit for attempting the sport in the first place, but was ultimately proof that heart and toughness isn't enough to make it in modern MMA. It wouldn't be the last time the UFC looked outside the box for a ratings ploy, but his story, yeah, that's for another time. Hey, this is the INC. Please like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a video.